Okay, our final task is to get a list of followers and following to populate the content in the user's profile. So back to VS Code, let's just clean things up at the top, and we'll start off in our agent.ts file. And what we'll do is we'll just add the method in here to list the followings, and we'll call it list followings. And once again, we need to pass in a username of type string, and we also need the predicate for this method, which of course is a string as well. And then we'll say requests.get, and we're going to be returning a list of profiles here. So we'll specify profile array as the type. Then we'll add the backticks, say /follow, / and then $, and in the curly brackets we'll specify the username. And then after the username we'll add a question mark for the query string, and we'll specify the predicate equals, and then we can say $, curly brackets, and predicates. And let's just move this down. So of course this matches what we're looking for, or our endpoint in our API. And what we can do then is we can go over to our profile store, and inside here we can add another method to go and get the followings. So we'll say load followings, and it's going to be an async method, and we need to pass in a predicate as a type of string. We don't need the username because we're only going to be viewing a user's list of followers or followings when they're on a particular user's profile page. And of course that means that we'll have access to their profile inside the store already. So we'll set our loading flag once again and set this equal to true. And in fact we actually need a different loading indicator for this, otherwise we're going to get too many loading flags on the same component. So what we'll do is we'll add loading followings as another boolean that we'll use specifically for loading the followings, and we need to give it an initial value of false. And of course if we're giving it an initial value, then we do not need to specify the type if it's a boolean, because this is going to be smart enough to realize what type it is. So back down to the bottom then, where we're creating or getting our list of followings, and we'll say loading followings equals true. And then what we'll do is we'll just add a try catch block and pass in the error, and we'll say console.log and error, and we'll add the run in action, and we'll say list.loading followings equals false. And then inside the try block we can say const followings equals, and we'll say await agent.profiles.load or list followings, and then we'll say list.profile.username, and we'll pass in the predicate. And we have a complaint, and that's because our profile could possibly be null, so we'll just add the exclamation mark to get around that, as we cannot call this particular method from our user interface if we do not have the user's profile inside the profile. And then we'll add a run-in action so that we can set our observers, and we're going to say list.followings equals followings, and we'll say list.loading followings equals false. And then we'll need to create a component for our followings. So what we'll do, we'll go back to our profile folder inside our features, and we'll add a new component, and we'll call it profile followings.tsx. And inside here we're just going to import React from React, and we're going to be observing from our store. So we're going to say export default, and we're going to use the observer once again, and we'll specify our function as profile followings. And inside this component we're going to need access to our profile store. So we'll say const profile store equals use store, and we'll also just destructure what we need from the profile store in here as well. So what we'll need is we're going to need the current user's profile, we'll need their followings, we'll need the load followings method, and we'll need the loading followings flag. And then what we can do is we can return, and this is going to be another tab pane, so we'll use the tab pane once again, and we'll add our loading flag for the tab and say loading followings. And then we'll add a grid, and we'll add a grid.column, and we'll give it a width equal to 16, and we'll add a header, and we'll say floated equals left, we'll have an icon equal to user, and the content will be equal to, and we'll need to add some logic to this soon, but for now we'll just keep it, or we'll just add a single string here, and we'll just say people following, and then we'll say $, and we'll just use the profile.displayName. But we're going to use the same component for both the followers and following, so we'll add some logic soon to this to display a slightly different text. And below this grid column, we'll add another grid column. Again, width equal to 16. And we're going to use our profile cards inside here. So what we'll do is we'll create a card group, and we'll say items per row, and we'll set this equal to 4. And then inside here we can loop over our followings. So we'll say followings dot map, and then each one of these followings is a profile. And then we can just add our profile card, and we can give it a key equal to profile.username, and the profile will of course be the profile. Now we need to do something when our component loads, and we need to go and load our followings. So what we'll do for the time being, and we'll need a smarter way of doing this soon, but just for now, to make sure things are working, we'll make use of useEffect. And in here we'll just say load followings, and what we're going to do is just hard code the predicate inside here to following. And like I say, we will need a smarter way of doing this, and we don't want loading followings, we want load followings. And then we'll add the dependency and just say load followings. Like I say, this will work temporarily. It's only going to show us the list of followings, it won't show followers, but this will suffice just to make sure that we're getting something back from our API, and then we'll look at a smarter way of dealing with this in the next lesson. So now we can just go ahead and go back to our profile content, and we can add the profile followings component. So we'll say profile followings, and we're using the same component for the other one as well. So we'll just copy this and paste it in here. So we'll be able to see half the functionality. We'll be able to see what followings a user has, just to make sure we can get something back from the API, and then we'll look at how we can make each of these work independently of each other. So let's head back to the browser, let's just refresh the page. And if I go to followers, then we see our loading indicator, and we see it spinning over and over again. So something's not quite right. And if we go back to the profile followings, then I've got the wrong dependency in the dependency list. Just an example of how easy it is to completely break your application and send it into an endless loop by getting the wrong dependency in there. Because the loading followings flag constantly changes after the load followings is completed, and every time a dependency changes, we use the useEffect. So a good example of why it's necessary to get your dependencies correct in the useEffect method. So let's just refresh the page once again. And if I click on followers and following, well, they don't really do anything. And Diane only has one follower, and she's not actually following anybody. So not a good example to look at because of the way we've hard-coded the predicate there. But if I go to Bob, I know Bob is following people, or he's following one person. So if I click on either of these, then I see that Diana is following Bob. And if I go back to activities, and I go and click on Tom's profile, then Tom has one person following him, and if I click on either of these, then Bob I can see is following Tom. And that's what we're looking for right now. So what we'll do next is we'll take a look at how we can react to when either of these tabs is clicked, in order to go and get the list of followers or following, depending on which one of these was clicked.